Hey, you know how there's a bunch of folks out there who daydream about owning their own private island? Most of them picture themselves chilling on some tropical paradise in the Caribbean or South Pacific. But have you heard of Gananoque? It's a little town on the St. Lawrence River in Ontario, Canada, right in the Thousand Islands area. Believe it or not, there are actually people living on these islands, both Canadian and American. And get this, some of these islands have legit castles. So, not all islands are created equal, dollar-wise. Yo, the Thousand Islands ain't no joke, they compete with any other islands worldwide. But get this, they are on the St. Lawrence River, not some tropical paradise. The most famous story about the Thousand Islands is about the salad dressing with the same name. Apparently, some local lady whipped it up and it became a hit. She then gave it as a gift to the owner of a fancy New York hotel, who put it on the menu around 1890. But there ain't no proof of this story in writing. I used to drive a truck for a living, hauling goods to all 48 contiguous states. In Canada, I used to drive for a decent-sized company with around 100 trucks. All us drivers could pick between long hauls, regional routes, or local deliveries. When we had to go on a long trip lasting a week or more, we could choose to stick to local routes for a week to be with our families, or take on more long hauls. Sometimes we could even bring our wives along for the ride. Most big trucking companies in Canada keep their drivers on the road for weeks on end. Trucking is just one of many tough jobs out there. Working in the military is tough on families, probably the toughest, followed by jobs in shipping and law enforcement. I did construction work during the summers in high school, so it made sense for me to start working full-time after graduation. By the time I was 23, I was a pretty good carpenter. When I was 19, I met Julie Simpson, who worked as an office clerk at a bakery. We got married when we were 21 and were both happy until the banking system and construction industry took a hit. The industry took a hit and Julie and I had a chat and decided I should give truck driving a shot. It paid pretty well, but the downside was being away from home a lot. The company I was working for as a driver said they'd pay for my truck driving school if I stayed with them for a year after getting my license. Julie and I talked it over and decided to go for it. They hired me and I went to school. 3 weeks later, I got my Class A CDL. The following week, I was paired up with a driving instructor who was. So, there was this old pro driver who took us newbies out on the road to show us the ropes on how to drive. It's easy driving a truck with an empty trailer, but it's a whole different ball game when you hook up a loaded trailer weighing between 16 and 36 tons. I was supposed to spend 5 weeks with my instructor, but he managed to convince the safety folks that I was ready to have my own truck after just 4 weeks. Spent a week cruising around the city, then another week on the local roads. Everything went smoothly and I got everything sorted out. So, Julie needs to swing by the office on Friday to grab my paycheck. It's not a big deal, we could have just gotten our checks directly, but Julie prefers to pick hers up in person. I've been working at this company for about 9 months now, just wrapping up a week of local driving. My dispatcher, Shirley, gave me a call and offered me a sweet deal. We've got some cargo going to Vancouver, Canada, and then a return flight to Montreal. Well, not exactly Montreal, but actually Garneau. Turns out the owner of the company recently bought another one. So, this guy who owned a transport company on Thousand Islands was super young, like only 6 or 7 years older than me. Shirley said there were 2 houses on the island, the main one and a guest house. The owner and his wife wanted to fill the main house with custom furniture from Vancouver Island, while the guest house was already furnished. They offered me a job to transport the furniture to Vancouver and then bring back the boss's furniture. It wasn't urgent, they said it wouldn't be ready for about a month, but it was definitely happening. So I got there early and the company's ops department was all about surprising the boss by delivering it ahead of schedule. Here's the deal though, you can't spill the beans to anyone, not even his wife. I mean, I'm not saying she'll spill the tea, but she might come after your paycheck or let something slip to the wrong person. The boss and his wifey will be there next weekend, probably around the time you roll into Vancouver and they hook you up. Sound like something you'd be down for? Before I could even answer, she interrupted me and said, remember, whether you like it or not, you can't tell anyone about this. Do you promise? I agreed and promised not to spill the beans. Fine, she said. Now, because you're taking it and I like you, have you seen that brand new Peterbilt truck in the yard? Of course I have, I replied. Well, it's yours now. Put your stuff in it. The cargo you're carrying is in trailer 2353. You can head out in the morning. Give me a call when you reach Vancouver and be careful. I headed home and told Julie that I had a trip to go on. We didn't mind the West Coast because the money was good, but we both didn't like that I would be gone for almost 2 weeks. To make up for it, we tried our best that night. Sex with Julie had always been something special. She was up for anything. Right after I started driving the truck, we took some new pictures of her so I could take her with me in the truck. I've been to Canada with my truck 4 times and every time, the truck was searched. I mean, searched. The only place they didn't search was... So I had this bag hanging from my seat when I crossed the border for the first time. There were some photos of her in the bag. After that, I left the photos at home when I found out I was heading to Canada. The other times I drove, they never bothered with the bag or any other part of my truck, not even under the sleeper mattress. I left the photos at home on that trip, it was no big deal. Crossing the border was smooth as usual, the Canadian officials were polite but super thorough during the search. I called Shirley and she told me about the boss's furniture. I was all set to go when they brought her over from the island earlier that day, getting ready for me to arrive. When I got to my client, it only took him an hour to unload me and another hour to get to the place where I was going to be loaded. Loading the trailer took well over an hour because they loaded each piece individually, then boxed and secured it. My truck was fully loaded when I headed back east. I returned to the States and headed east on Interstate 90. I came back from Canada to Detroit. The trip from Detroit to Montreal took about 9 hours. I drove over to Kingston, parked up for the night, and gave Shirley a call. She said the boss was on the island and had a barge all set up. I was told to head to the commercial loading dock first thing in the morning and they would unload the trailer and take the furniture over to the island. I got there at 6 a.m. and loading up onto the barge took until nearly 10 o'clock. The journey to the island took about 45 minutes and even though it was a direct route, the barge was moving pretty slow. When I arrived, I went to the guest house to surprise the boss. The whole island was covered in greenery. Why I know, I only knew how to get to the apartment complex through the trees. I thought I was heading to a guest house, but it had a little courtyard next to it. The main house wasn't too far from the guest house and it was massive. I saw the big boss in the courtyard of the guest house, rubbing something on a woman's bare chest while she was lounging on a chaise lounge. I figured it was sunscreen he was applying and I assumed the woman was his wife. But as I got closer, I could tell it wasn't sunscreen and she definitely wasn't his wife. That chick was mine, she was butt naked and I caught her with some dude. I walked up to them, cleared my throat, and they both freaked out. It took them a minute to realize they got caught. The dude didn't even know me, but the girl did. I told him I brought the new furniture from the pier. Then I told my wife she better start wearing some clothes before I show up. I turned around and headed back to the dock, just like that. I didn't hear a peep from any of them. I strolled past the dudes who were hoisting the first piece of furniture. I got to the dock before it hit me that I was on an island. I scanned the area and spotted 4 anchored boats. We'd heard there were multiple boats on the island, so I figured they all belonged to him. I had never steered a boat before, but that was about to change. I've seen enough TV and movies to know that boats have throttles push to go forward, pull to go in reverse. And I also knew that boats don't have brakes. I was trying to pedal, but I'll figure that out later. I checked out the smallest boat, but there was no key in the ignition. There was a board on the wall with what looked like boat keys attached to rubber balls so they wouldn't sink if they fell in the water. I grabbed all the keys and hopped into the boat. The second key I tried actually worked, so I tossed the rest into the river, rubber balls and all. The engine started right up, but the boat was still tied down. I quickly jumped out, untied the front and back, hopped back in, and took off. So I was on this boat and when I put it in reverse, it shot away from the dock real fast. I hit the gas and got thrown back in my seat. It only took about 15 minutes to get back to town. I came in too hot at the city pier and ended up damaging the boat when I hit it. I left the engine running when I jumped out and headed into town. The boat caught everyone's eye as I got into my truck, grabbed my stuff, and headed into town. I looked back and saw the boat drifting down the river with nobody in it. So, the taxi got me to Kingston and the airport real quick. The first plane took off in less than an hour, heading to New York. I got a ticket and then my phone rang. It was Julie. She left a message saying to call her back. I called Shirley and said, "Good morning, Scott. Did you do it?" Shirley asked, "How long?" I replied, "How long did he sleep with my wife?" Shirley was shocked. "What are you talking about?" "Oh my God, is she there?" I reassured her, "She's fine." "About 3 months, sorry Scott. His wife had to be there, otherwise I would never. I sent you a message so you could send me somewhere, but did you know the boss is having an affair with my wife?" "Who else knows, Shirley?" "It's just Joey and me." "Thanks Shirley, I appreciate it." "Wait, where are you going? What are you planning to do?" "Hold on, he's calling on the other line. I'll be back in a sec." Now I get why she didn't want me to tell Julie about the trip. She would have spilled the beans to Bradley and there wouldn't have been a surprise, especially after what just happened. It was a small airport and I could see everything and everyone coming. I was waiting around, hoping she or he would turn up, but they never did. The flight was quick, we landed, I got a rental car and drove 4 hours home. She wasn't there and I couldn't stop thinking about what to do on the way back. My phone rang again and she left a message saying she's on her way and begging me not to do anything until she gets there. She swears we never had sex, just fooled around a bit. Can you believe that? Jesus Christ. Man, I can't believe I was dumb enough to think she would actually show up at our place. I packed up all my stuff in my truck, walked over to the office and started working like nothing happened. Shirley and Joey were there, but when they saw me, they wouldn't even look at me. "How much do you owe me, Shirley?" She asked. "Write me a check for everything the company owes me right now." But Shirley was like, "Sorry, Scott. Mr. Bradley said not to give you anything until he talks to you." Man, I was so pissed. "You owe me, Shirley," I said. "Thank you very much," she said sarcastically. "He said you crashed one of his boats." "What else did he say?" "Ooh, what a mess. Did he really think he could talk about messing around with my wife without me knowing? Did you guys have a good laugh at my expense? Julie came by and asked you to delay me from getting on the road for as long as possible. Just give me a check, Shirley, and I won't wreck this whole damn office." It only took Julie a couple minutes to figure out how much they owed me. She called accounting and had them write me a check. When I got there, everything was ready. I took a look at it and changed my mind. "Can you please transfer the money to my card instead?" "Thanks, Scott." "Hey, can you transfer the money directly now please?" I gave them my card number and they did it. Bradley wouldn't be able to cancel the direct deposit payment. So, one day I went to Bradley's house for a picnic. My wife was probably there for more than just a picnic. When Mrs. Bradley opened the door, she looked and acted sick. She asked, "What can I do for you?" I said, "My name is Scott and I used to drive your husband's truck. This morning, I delivered a load of furniture to your island and found your husband massaging my wife's bare breasts. Hey, so I was just feeling up with one hand and the other was roaming below the belt. I just wanted to let you know. Have a good one." "Wait a sec, dude, what did you say your name was?" "Scott, man." "And what's your wife's name?" "Julie, man." "Did you see that this morning?" "I saw it with my own eyes." "Are you sure?" "Definitely, bro. Do you really think I would make something like that up about my own wife?" I walked to my truck and drove off not knowing where I was going, so I ended up at my parents' place. Mom always had coffee ready to help wake them up. She offered me a cup and I gladly took it. Soon enough, I was lounging on the sofa, closing my eyes. The next thing I knew, I heard my dad's voice, "Julie, get off my porch or I'll call the cops." "But I needed to talk to Scott after what you did to him." Dad asked, "In no way, but he just doesn't get it." "Oh, I think he gets it just fine. You slept with his boss for 3 months. What's so hard to understand about that?" "But he doesn't know why." "Of course he knows, you're a traitor." So I was like, "Get the hell off my porch." And then she's out there screaming my name, "Scott, talk to me." Please, Scott, give me a chance to explain. I was so tired from the long day, I just fell asleep again. The next morning, I woke up early and headed to my truck without a clue where I was going. When I opened the door, I saw Julie sleeping across the seat. She woke up when she heard me and tried to stop me from leaving. Please, Scott, just listen to me. I had no choice, you gotta believe me. So Julie, either you let someone get in your pants or you didn't, everything was messed up. So you decided to have sex on your own, it wasn't a question. Scott, just give me a chance. I'm telling you, you had sex willingly. Okay, I had sex willingly, but you lied. We never actually had sex, we just fooled around a bit. Did you really think I'd believe that? Get out of my truck. She didn't move, so I grabbed her hand and pulled her out. I was so angry, I drove off before she could even get up off the ground. I ended up at a fast food joint in town for some food. So I grabbed some brekkie from this joint, and while I was waiting, I went to the loo. Finally got my food, sat down at the table, and chowed down. After finishing up, I headed to the bank to split our cash. My phone kept ringing and there were a bunch of messages left, including one from my old boss, Ernest T. Bradley, threatening to sue me for wrecking his boat and intimidating his employees. He ain't messing around. That was just the first message. And then he drops the bombshell that he slept with my missus. Like, seriously. Gotta deal with this mess now. This shit happens all the time, she ain't my first wife and definitely won't be my last. Swallow your pride, apologize and make it right. That's what she's into, so just give it to her. If you don't, I might just keep doing it. Now get your ass back here and drive my truck home, or I'll report your ass for stealing. Plus, you'll have to drive for me for 3 more months to pay off your damn truck driving school. This was his second message. Damn, he's still up in Canada. I called his wife to check if I could meet her instead of just running to his place like I did before. She agreed and I played his messages for her. She was already feeling sick, but after hearing him, she felt even worse. At first, I wasn't sure if I believed you, but now I do. I'm going to kick his ass. Can I get a copy of this message? We made a copy for her. What are you going to do about your wife? She asked. Divorce, of course. I just don't know how to go about it. It's easy, she said. Find a good lawyer and hire him. It sounded so simple. I bounced from her place and went back to my folks. They were curious too, asking me what my plan was. I gave them the same answer I gave Mrs. Bradley. Then my old man repeated her exact words back to me. They talked me into it, so I began my search for a lawyer all over again. I had no clue where to begin, so I just started flipping through the phone book from her. I made it to D before I stumbled upon my lawyer, David Dennison. We clicked right away. Turns out, his whole family, including himself, were truck drivers until he got into a wreck and ended up paralyzed from the waist down. So, this guy graduated from law school in a wheelchair. And get this, he was the only one in his family not in the trucking business. But everyone knew and respected Ernest T. Bradley. Dennison kept pointing out how Bradley was young but had mad business skills. Like, everyone who knew him thought he was the real deal. He was a big shot in society, sponsoring sports teams and arts programs and donating to every charity that crossed his path. Dennison wouldn't even believe me when I spilled the beans about what I found out in Canada. He was totally Team Bradley and I was almost convinced to join in. Just ditch that lawyer and find a new one. But I ended up listening to the messages for him. He finally started to believe. Wow, this is going to cause a stir in the community if it gets out. How do you want to handle this? Keep it low-key or make a big scene? All I care about is getting a cheap divorce. As far as I know, this won't end up in the papers. But the reason for the divorce will be adultery. If that means everyone finds out, so be it. But there won't be any mental abuse or lies about irreconcilable differences from her. Man, we got played and they're gonna remember that. It's gonna be tough if that's all we got. Courts nowadays almost need to see proof, especially when going after a guy like him. Let's give it a shot, fine. We'll send the papers to her in a few days. Any clue where she might be? At work, at the bakery, or at home? Maybe in Canada with him, I don't know. But obviously we can't give her the papers in Canada, so we'll try at her place or at work. Works for me. You can reach me on my cell or at my place. Hey guys, I was so done living with my parents that I spent the next few days hunting for my own place. I found an apartment that wasn't the nicest or anything, but it was mine. A week later, Julia got me a job at my dad's welding shop. I never really cared for welding before, but I started to like it. He just wanted to get me out of my apartment because he thought I spent too much time inside. I was considering working for another transport company, but I ended up sticking with my dad. I wasn't really into it, so I ended up going to a welding shop. My dad had a pickup truck with portable welding gear, and all he did was fix stuff. Sometimes, a customer would ask for something specific, and my dad would hook them up. Julie tried to chat with me a few times, but once she got served with papers, everything had to go through our lawyers. Our first meeting was about a month after she got served. Her lawyer tried to get the cheating accusation dropped, but I flat out said no. Bradley got named in the divorce. Pat and Julie really didn't want his name to be linked to the divorce case for cheating. It could destroy his reputation, and he doesn't deserve that, she argued. I couldn't believe it. Are you kidding me? He's a scumbag who stole someone's wife, and everyone should know. Julie stepped in, saying, if you had treated your wife better, no one would have been able to steal her. This sparked a fight between us that had to be ended by putting us in separate rooms until we calmed down. When we were back together, she tried to talk to me again. I ain't gonna take his name out, so stop asking. Why you trying so hard to defend him? You planning on marrying him or something? Are you still hooking up with him? Just so you know, me and him are still together, so yeah, we're still getting it on. Her lawyer just put his head on the table and groaned, not even lifting it before saying, you straight up admitted to your husband and best friends that you cheated. That's like the worst thing you could do right now. I don't care, she replied. And to answer your other question, yeah, I'm gonna do it. Girl, marry him as soon as he's single again and you'll think he really loves you. I was like, sure, whatever. I put my phone on the table and checked out his messages to her. That's not what he meant, he was just messing with your head. I laughed as Mr. Dennison grabbed an envelope from his briefcase and slid it over to Julie. Her lawyer snagged the envelope, opened it, and checked out the contents. He read the note that was attached, then went through the photos one by one. He handed the package to Julie, who looked at the photos first and then read the note. Mr. Man, what a mess. Hey, I got some juicy info that might help you out with your divorce. So, the first 5 pics were taken on the island 3 weeks ago. The woman in the pics is actually the wife of his hairdresser. She ditched her hubby to spend the weekend with my man. The next 6 pics were taken at our place last week. I was away with my folks at the time, and he picked up this random chick at a bar. I have no clue if she's married, and honestly, I couldn't care less. I don't even know her name, and I highly doubt my husband does either. She was just another fling, like your wife. The letter was signed by some lady named Cynthia. All the photos are included. Bradley and those 2 chicks were caught in compromising positions, no doubt they were getting it on. Julie saw the pics, pushed them away, and bounced. Didn't see her again until we were in court. We split everything, money, jewelry, fancy dishes, and clothes. She crashed at our place for a bit. Bradley's rep took a nosedive, and his sports teams tanked. Cynthia got her share too. She got half of the moving company and their house as part of their assets, while he only ended up with an island in Canada because she didn't want it. He had the audacity to send my lawyer a bill for truck driving school, claiming I left my job before fulfilling our contract. Mr. Dennison quickly told him to kiss our asses in a letter. Cynthia called to tell me to ignore the letter and offered me a job as an operations manager for a trucking company. I was tempted, but ultimately said no. So, last year I figured out that if I really focused, I could actually make some cool metal beads. Huge shout out to my dad for being patient and teaching me how to do it. I also found out that I actually really like doing this stuff. I went on a few dates but never had anything serious. I bumped into Julie a couple times and we always just said hi. Bradley sold his trucking business and I never saw Cynthia again, but I did run into Bradley every now and then. I could tell it was him, but I doubt he would even remember me from when I used to work for him. Man, I was working with tons of drivers and he only popped in every now and then. When I was learning how to weld, I realized I actually liked working with metal. So, besides fixing stuff in the shop and using the truck for repairs on the go, I started making small things like weather vanes, custom gate hinges, and mailbox stands. My dad and I hardly ever worked on weekends, but one Sunday afternoon I was tinkering with a fancy weather vane. I was struggling with getting the proportions right, so I just stared at it hoping a solution would come to me out of nowhere. But it didn't. I heard the door open or close, but I felt someone there, so I looked up and it was Julie. None of us said anything. She stood there for a couple of minutes before grabbing a metal stool and sitting down. "Can we talk?" she asked. "I have nothing to tell you," I said. "Fine, just listen," she leaned forward. "I don't have a good reason for what I did. You and I had a good life, enough money, a nice apartment, and we loved each other, at least I think we did. So why out of nowhere did I decide to sleep with Bradley? The answer is both simple and it's complicated. I could try to blame you and say that you were never around enough, because that's what he told me, and eventually I started to believe it. He also said that you mistreated me when you were home, and eventually I started to believe that too. He claimed that almost every truck driver found someone to fool around with while on the road, and I started picturing you having a good time with some waitress at a truck stop or a female truck driver. He also said that truck drivers never made enough money to treat their women right, and eventually I started to believe that too. I realized he was a slimy jerk and probably still is. I was so naive, it wasn't just overnight. He worked on me for months. Then Shirley got in on it, telling me how great Bradley could be if I gave him a chance. She said she could keep an eye on your whereabouts so I wouldn't find out. She also mentioned that Mrs. Bradley said she didn't need sex as much as her husband, so she let him hook up with other women to keep him happy and make him a better spouse. She told me that Mrs. Bradley must have been okay with the girls he was hooking up with, and that she only liked me because she saw me when I came to pick up your checks. Now, this lie might sound dumb, but back then it didn't seem that way. Now that I know better, I sat and listened while I thought she had calmed down. Eventually, I asked, "Why are you telling me all of this now?" She replied, "I don't know. I guess I never really wanted to tell you the truth. I didn't want you to know how dumb I was. I always thought I could come up with a better story. Bro, it was totally your fault. I thought of some funny jokes but never got a chance to tell you. When I drove past your store this afternoon, I saw you and stopped. I had no idea what I was gonna say, just knew I had to say something if you'd let me. And what I blurted out ended up being the truth. What were you expecting from all this? Just so you know, none of this was on you. It was all my own selfish desires and made-up scenarios. I also wanted you to know that, whether you believe it or not, I don't love you anymore. I think you're lying. You can't really love someone and lie or cheat on them, but you did both. Remember when you wanted to marry him? Are you still hooking up with him? I can't explain it any clearer than I already have, and I'm not going to try to make you believe me. And no, I'm not seeing him. We haven't seen each other since that day in the lawyer's office when I saw those photos. She sat there for a few more minutes watching me work, I guess. Yo, I better bounce. She got up and Scott, I peeped her. Can you forgive me enough to give me another shot? I shook my head. You know where the door is. After she dipped, I didn't do much except confirm that my ex-boss was legit and my ex-wife was dumb as hell. I started thinking about what would have happened if I didn't go to that island to surprise my boss. Would I still be stuck driving a truck and settling for leftovers? I figured I'd rather make weather vanes and go broke. One day, we got a flyer for. So, I got this flyer in the mail for some Renaissance festival. I had never even heard of it before. The flyer had pictures of people jousting and knights in armor walking around. There were also photos of people selling armor, swords, knives, and all that fancy Renaissance stuff. Turns out, this festival is happening right down the highway in Maryland. From the flyer, I also found out that Maryland has two official sports, jousting and lacrosse. I was skeptical about jousting being a legit sport, so I did some research. I woke up and realized it was legit, so I decided to hit up the Renaissance Festival. Spent the whole day there, mostly checking out all the cool stuff the vendors were selling and people watching. There was a ton of cash flowing around the place, and I figured I could get in on the action. Saw a bunch of sword and knife makers, even some gunsmiths doing their thing on site. I was really into the armor and shields, so when I got home, I did a bunch of research and made my first shield and sword. I also looked up Renaissance Festival schedules online and ended up making 5 more shields and 7 more swords. Took M to the nearest festival I could find. Found out there were tons of M all over the country. Got there early to chat with some vendors. Met this one guy who had some top-notch swords and knives for sale. Made him a deal I'd display his stuff and he'd get a cut of the sales. He was a bit unsure at first, but eventually agreed. Planned on staying the night, but all the nearby rooms were booked up because the festival was so damn popular. Took it as a sign and headed home instead. Don't do that often. So I had these random dudes I could trust, but I couldn't sell my stuff to them myself. Then this guy Teddy Woff called me on a Sunday morning and said he sold all my stuff. He sent me a check and I started a new business. In the next few weeks, I did even more festival stuff. Teddy wanted 10 swords and 10 shields for the next festival, which was happening the following week. I managed to get 4 of each ready. Meanwhile, I was still helping my dad with his business. We got a call to fix our driveway gate because it looks like my daughter's boyfriend drove through it. So, instead of waiting for the gate to open, I heard there was alcohol involved. I walked out and saw this massive gate on the circular driveway, with a huge house outside. I met the owner, Mr. James Jameson. At first, I turned down jobs because I thought he was too fancy for us. The gate was almost 3.5 meters high. I decided to give it a shot. Worst case scenario, would just waste a little time and metal if I messed it up. Spent most of the day figuring out what tools I needed, then went back to the store to see what we had available. So, I found a few spots that I thought could do the trick, and I went back the next day. I had been at it for about 2 hours and had actually gotten somewhere when this woman around my age showed up with some iced tea. Her name was Hannah, and she lived there. Turns out, it was her kid who messed up the gate. I had my own snacks, but she kept coming out with iced tea and chatting away. It took me 2 days of bending, twisting, straightening, and welding, but I managed to fix the gate. Hannah was there the second day, cracking jokes and bringing drinks. Good times. I started hanging out with this chick around the same time I got into armor, since they are all the rage at festivals. I was curious about how to make them, how much it would cost, and if we could actually make some money off of them. I was dating this girl I met at the library while doing some research. We would meet up at least twice a week and hook up every time we hung out. But like my other relationships, this one also fizzled out after a few weeks. There was a movie theater at the mall that I hardly ever went to, but one Friday night. I was so bored that I went before the movie started. Hannah came in with her boyfriend and they sat right in front of me. Less than 5 minutes after the lights went off and the movie previews began, I heard Hannah say, "If you touch me there again, I'll cut off your balls." Her boyfriend's arm was around her shoulder and she got annoyed and left. He begged her to come back, but she didn't give in. I wasn't close enough to hear, but they were definitely arguing about something. So, I decided to step in, which I've never done before. "Hey, Hannah, are you all right?" She looked at me, taking a moment to recognize me. "No, that's not true. This guy has more arms than an octopus and I'm tired of fending him off. Can you take me home?" "Sure." We were walking towards my truck when another guy came up to us. "Are you okay, Hannah?" he asked. "Yeah, I'm good now." "Do you mind taking me home?" she replied without even looking at me. They left for his car without saying anything to me. Sayonara to me like I was invisible, just stood there watching them bounce. Shook my head and bounced back home. Few days later, I was at her crib and there were these railings by the pool that needed fixing up. Mr. Jameson asked me to come back and help out. Hannah peeped me and came over to shoot the breeze, but didn't even bring up the movie drama. I was kinda peeved about being ghosted at the movies, so I wasn't really feeling chatty. She caught the vibe and bounced. Came back the next day with some spare parts. It was just some basic railing that you can find easily. She was walking towards the pool and stopped to talk. I mostly brushed her off. I used to like our chats when I was working on the gate, but not so much after what happened at the theater. Are you mad at me? She asked. Do you remember what went down at the movies last week? She asked. You mean when I was with the octopus? Yeah, what about it? You asked me to take you home, remember? Oh yeah, I do. What happened next? Nothing. Jimmy showed up and gave me a ride home, and you were gone. Is there anything wrong with that? No. Was it bad? Not really, if you didn't see anything. I guess I grabbed a hammer and started banging on the metal just to make some noise, thinking she would leave. It doesn't really make sense, I know. Yeah, she was getting annoyed. I don't get you. I stared her down, that's the issue. I started banging on the metal again and she got the message and left. The rest of the day was spent finishing the railings. My interest in armor grew and I did a ton of research on how it's made. I even made my first piece of armor. And he was so proud of it, I sent his pic to Teddy to get his opinion. Stick to shields and swords, he said, laughing. You're good at it, but the armor needs some work before anyone will buy it. Just a few days later, I was at a local bar, sipping on a beer and watching a baseball game when Hannah plopped down next to me. I'm meeting some friends for a drink, wanna join? She asked. Nah, I'm good here, I replied. She got up to leave but then stopped. She looked at me and asked, are you ever gonna tell me what I did to make you mad? Sorry, I gotta break it down for YA, but if you didn't catch on, that's on you. Have fun with your drinks. I was just about done with my beer and ready to bounce when she came back. Oh man, Scott, I didn't mean to ghost you at the theater. That jerk totally pissed me off and I lost my cool. My bad, man. I think she mentioned something to the others and got set straight. No worries, all good. She asked if I wanted to hang out with them now, but I asked to just chill and have a drink to make up for it. I smiled back. Thanks for coming back. Everyone had a few drinks and the night ended up being a blast. I can't remember the names of two of them, but they kept reminding Hannah to mind her manners all night. I felt bad for her. The group split up and we all headed out. I went out with Jenny and sat beside her at the table, asking about Hannah. Jenny said they've been friends for a while. Look, Scott, I'm not her bestie, but we are close. There's something about you that she likes. She feels bad for how she's been treating you. So she was like, damn, she went and told everyone at the table that she already told you. Gotta give her props for that. I need to call her. You got her number? No. Give me your phone then. I called her up and she gave me Hannah's number. I called her up one morning the next week while I was working at the store and Hannah walked in. I figured she must have gotten the address from her dad. Did you have a good time last time? I enjoyed it. I really liked hanging out with your friends. That's cool and all, but what about me? What about me? Do you like me? I said sorry before, remember? Yeah, I remember. So then why aren't we friends? I smiled and said, I think we are figuring it out. Apologizing doesn't automatically make us friends. It just shows you know you messed up and feel bad about it. That's why you say sorry. The other person might forgive you or they might not. I forgave them, but it doesn't mean we are suddenly best buds. It just means I see they realize their mistake and are sorry for it. And if the apology was real, which it was, then I'm cool with it. Okay, let's go grab dinner then, I laughed. Why not? She asked. It'll be a good way to work on developing our friendship. Fine, when? Why not tonight? And so it was. Hannah and I had dinner and our friendship grew stronger. We dated for 2 months before I saw her naked, but that was just the beginning. Our relationship flourished and it didn't take long before we wanted to spend all our time together. She would come to the store just to sit and be with me, and we both enjoyed that time together. I could work and she could read. We never had to talk or interact. All we needed was to be together. Just make sure you're there for each other. One night, while we were chatting in bed, I found out that she had only been married for a short time. But then she surprised me by saying that Jonah Jameson wasn't her real dad. Her mom and him were only married for 7 years. She had an older brother and their dad passed away 2 years later. Then their mom married Jameson, who owned a trucking company. Her brother, Nest, wanted to take over and run it. He was 6 years older than Hannah, and most people thought he was too young. But Hannah and her mom agreed to let him. He was really good at what he did and the company did really well. I got up, poured us some drinks, then went back to bed. I asked about your brother and you said you already told me most of it, the important stuff anyway. The bottom line is, the transport company was thriving so much that he and my ex-daughter-in-law bought an island in Canada. But then some woman caught his eye and he ended up getting divorced and selling the company. Apparently, this woman's husband started working for him and thought they could take over. Man, my brother got screwed over by his wife. She slid into the picture and lured him in. They set it up so her husband would catch them together on their little island. She ended up divorcing my brother, taking half of the company, and then they had to sell it off. What a couple of thieves. I downed my drink in one go, wondering how much they squeezed out of him. I asked my brother, but he never told me. They must have gotten something out of it. Do you remember their names? I did know, but I totally forgot. I thought about telling her the truth, but I figured it wasn't worth the hassle. Me and this girl were about to break up, so I thought why not have one last romp before it's over. Afterwards, I almost convinced myself not to tell her who I really was because the sex was that good. I knew once I came clean, it would be over between us. We were at her place and I was getting ready to leave, so I got dressed and sat on the edge of her bed putting on my socks and shoes. Finally, I decided it was time to spill the beans. I said, let's talk about your brother's divorce. Is what you told me the real deal, or his side of the story? Someone told me the official version, so why are you asking? Everything went totally wrong. What do you mean? So I told her the real story, and halfway through, she jumped out of bed, still naked, and just stared. In the end, I said that the only thing Julie and I accomplished was getting a divorce, not extortion. When I finished, all she said was, "You're lying, get out." I insisted that it was true, but she threw a pillow at me and told me to leave, saying not to come back. I hated that it ended like that, but I loved that last moment. Why I know, my love life was kinda dull, and then I hit a rough patch socially. I just couldn't seem to find my way out of the funk. So one night, I decided to treat myself and went to this fancy restaurant. After finishing my meal, I looked around and saw Hannah and her brother at a table nearby. They had a cake with candles on it. I asked for the bill, paid up, and then walked over to their table and sat down. They both gave me this look like, "What the heck are you doing?" "Yo, this dude's an alien," her brother spoke up first. "You sure you're at the right table?" he asked, clearly not recognizing me. "Yeah, and I think you should come clean to your sister about your divorce," I said. "She knows about it," he shot back. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. "But obviously she doesn't know the whole truth, so you gotta spill it," I insisted. "Scott, what the hell are you doing?" she nearly screamed. "Get out of here." Like magic, the waiter appeared. "Any issues here?" he asked. "This guy," Hannah pointed at me, "sat here uninvited and threatened my brother. I want him gone." "Hey, buddy, you gotta go." "I mean it, get out of here." "I mean, Bradley, you're such a jerk." "And Hannah, why didn't you ever talk to his ex-wife? Go to the courthouse and check out my divorce record, then you'll see the truth." "Just leave already," she said. So I left, knowing it would be the last time I'd see her. I went back to my shop to work on my favorite projects, making axes and chainmail. I was too busy with my work to bother with her anyway. There was a festival planned for the next day. Over the weekend, I brought some shields, axes, and chainmail samples to show Teddy. He hooked me up with a vendor pass, so I drove in through the entrance. When I got there, Teddy was chatting with a chick dressed in old-timey clothes. She was wearing this long dress with a low-cut bodice that barely covered her tits. I just stood there and waited while they chatted. Eventually, Teddy saw me, recognized me, and gestured for me to join them. He introduced me to the chick as Scott. He told her that I'm the dude who designs and creates some of the stuff we sell. "He might have some new stuff," Scott writes. I chuckled, "That's just my thing." I got some new clothes from my truck. Both him and Diana were frozen in front of it, like it was a treasure. I couldn't stop staring at her top every time she leaned forward. I leaned in too, hoping to see more, but it was too crowded for me to get a better look. I hung out with them for a while and even had dinner with them, which was meat pies and iced tea from a different vendor. I wanted to ask about their relationship, but there never seemed to be a good time. When I asked the question, there were a bunch of folks milling around catching up with old friends from past festivals. About half of them were decked out in old-timey costumes, with some dudes fighting with swords just for kicks. It was like they were practicing for the real deal in front of the crowd starting the next day. I've never seen so many people having a blast like that before. Teddy had a spot in the vendor and reenactor area, so I crashed at his tent for the night once things settled down. Yo, I asked him about Diana. She and her sis are the ones in charge of this festival and tons of others all over the country. Everyone's stoked she's here. We've been tight with her for years. Actually, if you weren't here today, she'd be bummed. Oh, why didn't you say something? I would have gone to a motel. Nah, you wouldn't even if I let you. There ain't no rooms free within 50 kilometers. The next day when guests started showing up, the reenactors had a blast haggin with M. And of course, Diana was a huge hit as always. That's what I heard, at least. I hung out with Teddy all weekend, watching his stuff while he and Diana did their thing. I chatted with other sellers and visitors, sold all of Teddy's stuff and some of my own, and made some good money. I'm definitely going to more festivals in the future. We packed up on Sunday and after an 8-hour drive, Teddy convinced me to stay another night before their next festival, which was 18 hours away. Man, on Wednesday I didn't think I would have enough time to make the chainmail. But I told him I would try. When I got back home, I went straight to the workshop and got to work. It was getting late, and I started yawning and realized how tired I was. I had barely slept over the weekend. The clock showed it was almost 2 o'clock in the morning when I finally left. It was around 3 o'clock when I got back home. I hadn't even been home for 5 minutes when my doorbell rang. I opened the door and Hannah practically fell into my arms, reeking of alcohol. There were 2 cops standing there. Is that Scottish guy behind her your boyfriend? I know her, but she's definitely not my girlfriend. Are you sure? She's insisting that you're her boyfriend. Not even close. Last time I saw her, she called me a liar and kicked me out of her house. So, I can guarantee you I'm not her boyfriend. Well, that's not entirely true. The last time I saw her was at a restaurant, but it doesn't matter. Fine, let's go get her, Tommy. Tommy must have been his partner because he stepped forward and took her hand. Were you taking her? Just to spend the night at the station. Nah, don't do that. I'll take care of her. Are you sure? Yeah, but I can't let her spend the night at the station. So, I left her dressed and laid her on the only bed I had, mine. I would have slept on the couch, which was better than the air mattress in Teddy's tent, but I would have preferred my own bed. Instead, there was a snoring drunk woman inside. I woke up the next morning and went to work. I hadn't heard anything from her all day and fully expected that. I thought she'd still be snoozing when I got back, but I was way off. She was gone and the place was sparkling. I hit the shower right away, hoping to find a note or something, but nope, nothing there. I tried working like crazy, but couldn't finish a single new piece of mail. Then Teddy showed up and swiped some of my shields, swords, and axes I had hidden away. We talked about maybe hiring some help, but realized there weren't many skilled metal workers around. So we thought about doing some training instead. So we decided to place ads in the newspaper and the festival newsletter. It was Friday night and I was in the workshop trying to invent a machine that could make chainmail quicker than me. There were a few out there already, but I thought I could do it better. I was exhausted when there was a knock at the door. It was Hannah, looking very serious. She thanked me for helping her out with the cops. I just stood there and nodded. I quickly tried to tidy up before she came in. All right, I nodded again. She couldn't come up with anything to say, so we just stood there staring at each other. I told her it's been a long day and I needed to get some sleep. I pushed past her, closed and locked the door, then headed to my car. I said goodnight as I was almost getting into the car, but then I heard it. She admitted that my brother had lied. I just waved over my shoulder, got into my car, and drove home. I was really into the armor after Teddy criticized the first one I made. I did a ton of research and ended up making another one. I was a role model for others, working hard and putting in a lot of time and effort. It was tough, but I enjoyed the challenge. I was confident enough to showcase my work at the next festival, and Teddy really liked it. We could have sold it multiple times, but we decided to keep it as a sample of my work. People checked it out, gave their thoughts, and if they were interested in buying something, we discussed any adjustments they wanted to make to their order. My festival life was great and I made good money. I even bought a trailer to transport my instruments and supplies so I could easily move around. I was hustling from one festival to another, selling my stuff. I'd be out there at a booth talking to customers or chilling in the back chatting with the other vendors. One night, I was shooting the breeze with my old man and we were both amazed at how popular Renaissance metal work was. Who would have thought so many folks were into armor and could actually drop the cash for it? Those things ain't cheap, man. Festival season wrapped up and I started seeing this chick I met at the car lot. I was thinking about getting a new ride, cause my dad's welding truck is on its last legs. Alright, so I was thinking of putting some welding gear on my truck, selling the old one, and maybe getting a newer, bigger one. She was fixing up her car while I was checking out the new truck parked outside the showroom. We started chatting and ended up swapping numbers. A week later, we went on our first date, then a second, and so on. One night, I dropped her off at home and she invited me in. We had a couple drinks and I sat on her couch while she stood in front of me, starting to unbutton her blouse. She asked if I had any objections if she made herself more comfortable. Hey, she was all chill, asking if I minded her watching and enjoying. I was like, nah, go for it. She grinned and said that's the whole point of the action. I undress while she watches, then she undresses while I watch, and then we have sex, hoping it lasts a bit. Seems like she's got it all planned out, huh? Oh yeah, then her blouse was off and her skirt was about to hit the floor. I went for her panties, but she pushed my hands away. Let me do this, just watch and enjoy, she said. You like watching a lady undress, don't you? I was like, I don't know, I've never seen her look so hot before. She let out this deep, sexy laugh. I hope you're better in bed than you are at lying to her. Her bra flew off and landed on top of her skirt. You're pretty confident, huh? Oh yes, she said, it's your turn. I started unbuttoning my shirt but she told me to slow down, saying we have the whole night ahead of us. She wanted to enjoy the show. So I slowed down and she licked her lips. I kicked off my shoes, unbuckled my belt, and unzipped my pants as I started pulling them down. She placed her hands on mine and knelt down. I was pulling my pants down to the floor when she got down on her knees. I glanced down and saw her hands on her hips as she looked up at me. What's next, t-shirt or shorts, she asked. What do you want? T-shirt, I replied. I took off my t-shirt and tossed it on the floor. She picked it up and sniffed it, saying, I love the smell of men. I left around 3 in the morning and on the way home, I couldn't stop thinking about her and comparing her to Hannah, the last time we had sex. Let's figure out who was the better one in this relationship. It lasted about 4 months before we called it quits. My phone kept buzzing, reminding me that I had been ignoring it all night. There were 3 messages from Hannah. The first one said, please call me when you get this, I don't care what time it is. I trusted her and called her. She picked up after 2 rings and slowed a hello, Scott. She sounded a bit drunk. Did I wake you up? I think I dozed off. I tried to stay awake, waiting for your call. Fine, I called. What's so important? She said, I wanted you to know that my brother lied about his. Hey, I know we talked about splitting up and I apologized for my part in it. Is there anything else you want to talk about? Actually, I've been thinking, can we give it another shot? I really miss you. But let's be real, it just wouldn't work out. Your brother messed around with my ex-wife, so if we got serious, it would just be awkward and messy. I don't want to put myself through that drama. I could tell you were upset, and I knew you were gonna say it, but I was hoping you wouldn't. See why later, Scott. The Renaissance festivals are back and I managed to get my passes, bought a tent and some camping gear, and hit the road. I spent most of my time helping Teddy at his stand. When I wasn't doing that, I was working on making new stuff to sell. My armor got a lot better during the break, and we managed to sell at least one piece at every festival. We could have sold more, but it took forever to make each one. 2 days after we closed one of the festivals, Teddy called and asked if Hey, so this guy asked me to help out at his booth for the next festival. I said yes because he lives close to the festival site and brought his trailer with all the stuff I needed. I loaded up my truck and left my trailer at home. I worked at 3 festivals in a row and even made some good money in front of the crowds. I also got to show off my chainmail machine by the 3rd festival. The next one near Philadelphia is gonna be 11 days long and one of the biggest in the country. Can't wait. Normally, these things went from Thursday to Sunday, but this one started on Thursday and went on through the whole weekend, the next week, and even the weekend after. I ended up spending 2 weeks at home, busting my ass on the material for it, especially focusing on the armor. My old man was a pro when it came to shields, axes, and swords. I was burning the midnight oil every night, and one night, super late, my doorbell rings. I open it up, and in stumbles a wasted Hannah. "Is this your girl?" one of the 2 cops with her asks. "If it keeps her out of trouble tonight, I guess so," I tell him as I half carry, half drag her inside. So I brought her to my bedroom and just chucked her on the bed. I showered, shaved, put on some pajamas and grabbed my clothes for the next day just in case she decided to pull the same stunt and puke all over again in the morning. I checked on Hannah, who was still knocked out, and debated whether to stick around and talk to her or just let it go. I headed to work that evening, and when I got back home, the place was spotless again. She even cleaned up my kitchen and bathroom. My toothbrush and toothpaste weren't where they usually were, so I moved them back to their rightful place. My toothbrush and washcloth were both wet on the sink. I grabbed an enchilada from the freezer and popped it in the microwave for dinner, but ended up not eating it. The next morning, I headed off to a festival in Philadelphia, bringing all my gear for shields and chainmail demonstrations. The first day was incredible, and it only got better from there. On Sunday, a big crowd watched me for most of the day. By the time the festival ended, Teddy and I were completely exhausted from vending all day. We were always the life of the party over there. We cooked food, played music, drank alcohol, practiced sword fights, fixed up armor, took care of horses, and had sex. It wasn't uncommon to walk by a tent and hear people getting it on, or see a camper rocking back and forth. After things settled down, I sat outside my tent wishing I had someone to cuddle with. Hannah was probably available, but I just couldn't bring myself to call her. The crowds on Mondays weren't too big, but there were a decent amount of people walking around, nothing crazy though. It was like smack dab in the middle of the day and I was showing off how boring it is to put together chainmail. I glanced up and spotted Hannah checking me out. I kept on with my demo and told the onlookers to hit me with any questions. But no one said anything, they just scattered. Hannah was still hanging around. "You enjoy this?" she asked. "Yeah, I actually do," I replied. "You're killing it," she said before walking off and blending into the crowd. I didn't see her again until the end of the event. So my folks showed up on Wednesday with more shields and axes. I gave them a tour, but they didn't seem too thrilled with what I had going on. Showed them where the vendors were posted up, and my mom was not psyched about helping me set up my tent. The rest of the week and weekend went smoothly, and Teddy and I were happy with how things turned out. When I got back home, I took a day off. Found my dad working on some chainmail for me. Started chatting with him about my plans for a bigger motorhome and trailer. Then, Hannah walked in on the festival. Hey, it was a blast hanging out with a few mates at the last one. We are planning to hit up the next one, which isn't too far from here. One of them even suggested going in costume, should be a laugh. I just played it cool and said it should be fun. Will you be there? Probably not, my old man and I have work to do. Can I come along with you guys? Nah, not really practical as I'll be there from Wednesday to Sunday. All good, we can just grab a motel room. But they usually sell out months in advance. Where will you crash then? In a tent, haha. Maybe we could share a small one, for the little ones. My old man gave me a smirk, walked away, and said, "You'll never forget that your brother hooked up with your wife. So yeah, looks like you and I aren't gonna be in it for the long haul." She glanced around to make sure my dad was out of earshot. "But hey, that doesn't mean we can't still be friends, right? We have fun in bed together, don't we?" I nodded in agreement. "So why not just keep using each other? You can see other people, but if you need some action, I got you covered. How does that sound?" I looked at her and said, "You're the best thing I've ever had." I've said it before. I'm gonna say this again, but the idea of sharing doesn't sit right with me. I can't stand the thought of hooking up with you just for you to bounce to another guy. Even if you haven't hooked up with him yet, we both need to find someone and stick to it. She got close to me, reached out, touched my face, and kissed me. "You don't get it, I'm already in a relationship. If you want to date someone else, go for it, but just know that I'll always be here for whatever you need, whenever you need it. I don't need anyone else. I love you and I'm committed to making this work." She kissed me and then left. I think my dad saw her leaving. "What are you gonna do about her?" I was still staring at the door she walked out of. "I have no clue, Dad. What do you think? Either get over the fact that her brother hooked up with your ex-wife and accept that she's here to stay, or leave town and lay low. Maybe it's time to do what Mom and I discussed." "What's going on?" "Let's talk about this later." So, when we got back home, we were just chilling at the dinner table when he spilled the beans to my mom about Hannah. That's when I figured it might be a good time to give Scott that present we've been yapping about. "I reckon you're onto something," my mom agreed. "What's the big secret you two are whispering about?" she asked. "I'm not keen on the idea of you camping out in a tent," my mom added. "We are gonna get you a motor home," my dad chimed in. I knew there was no point arguing with them, and honestly, I thought it was a pretty sweet idea. It took me about a week to find the perfect one, but I didn't need any driving lessons for this bad boy. So, I had a Class A CDL and I just hugged them both, thanked them, and bought a trailer to pull behind me. I set up the trailer so I could work in it if needed. I also connected power from the van to the trailer. It was a great setup. I focused on making armor, while my dad made shields, swords, and axes. We both really enjoyed doing this type of work. Teddy got jealous when he saw my trailer and wanted to know if I had christened it yet. "What do you mean?" she asked. "Has anyone already had sex in it?" "No," he grinned. "Do you mind if Diana and I—" He was cracking up, so he told her to go ahead and help herself. He texted her and she showed up in just 10 minutes. He took her hand and they started strolling, holding hands and laughing. When they got back, he said, "We wanted you to be the first to know, Diana and I are getting hitched." She gave me a big hug and said it was your van that drove him crazy. She thanked me and mentioned that she didn't see much of any of them that weekend, but my van smelled like perfume and stuff. I was back home for a week when Hannah spotted the van and stopped by. I had been in a dry spell for a while and I knew I could get her into bed. So I took her on a tour and she was really impressed. She was like, "This is way more than just a tent." And I was like, "Yeah, it's got a double bed and a big closet." Of course, I had to show off the bathroom, too. She was like, "Can 2 people fit in there?" And I was like, "Probably." We were in the living room of the van when she asked me, "Has this thing been christened yet?" I was like, "What do you mean?" I knew she was talking about sex. She asked me if anyone had already done it in there. I lied and said, "No, it's brand new." Then she kinda whispered, "We could do it now, if you want." Yo, this weekend we were chilling in my parents' backyard and she was talking about doing something impossible. "What do you mean, this weekend?" she asked. "We'll have plenty of time after the festival ends in the evening, we can do it then." "Sorry, but this is Southern Virginia, even if I said yes, it's too far of a drive for you." "You're right," she said, "so I'll just roll with you." "Didn't you hear what I just said?" She started pulling at my shirt, dragged me towards her. "Scott, you admitted that I'm the best you've ever had. You're the best I've ever been with, and I'm totally in love with you. I know you're into me too. Let's just hook up whenever we can. Oh, and I have this dress that would be perfect for the festival, everyone will be obsessed with it." She kissed me softly and lovingly, like she was head over heels for me, especially you. I'm leaving on Tuesday at 5 a.m., I won't wait for you, I said quietly. She kissed me again. You don't have to, she was right. She packed her clothes and left. Okay, so I was in the kitchen on Monday night and then crashed in the van. The next morning, as soon as I started driving, she hopped in the passenger seat with just a robe on. I could tell because she kept giving me dirty looks every time I glanced over. Then we met Diana and they were both dressed in low-cut dresses showing off their cleavage. I was counting down the minutes until the workday was over. After we finished up, Teddy and I shut down the booth. Diana and Hannah were cooking dinner in the van when we arrived. I've never tasted anything Hannah made before. So, after Teddy and Diana left, Hannah asked me if I wanted to shower with her. There was enough space for both of us in the shower, and then we ended up in bed. That night was just the beginning of many nights and days where we had a good time together in that van. This all happened about 3 years ago. At first, her family thought I only let her travel with me to get back at her brother, who had convinced them that Julie and I were the reason for his divorce, not him. Obviously, none of them had been in court. They saw the truth and believed him just like Hannah did. Hannah gave them copies of my divorce papers and her ex-sister-in-law's papers. He stuck around in town and broke up a few more marriages before deciding to move to the other side of the country for his health. Hannah got some new dresses that she wears to festivals. They don't show off her big belly as much. She never said she wanted to be a wife before becoming a mother, but I know she's thinking about it. Me too, sign me up. Make sure you subscribe to our channel so your partner doesn't play you, and stay tuned for the next story because it's way better than this one. And if you're underage, don't even bother with the next one.